All right, so good morning, ladies and gentlemen from Asia. And for Europe and US, good evening. And on behalf of the HKTDC, we welcome you to this wonderful online occasion, Content Without Borders, the new reality of content production, financing, and distribution in a post-pandemic world, that we gladly co-organize with the Producers Guild of America International. As you may see from the screen, the session comes with interpretation capability. You're also welcome to ask questions in the Q&A panel. Our speakers will address them by the end of the session. To kickstart the panel, I'd like to introduce Ms. Elizabeth Dell, Chair, International Committee, Producers Guild of America, to say a few words for us. Elizabeth, how are you doing in LA?
Great, thank you. And thank you to everybody all over the world, including our panelists all over the world who are calling in and being part of this. It's exciting to see the participant numbers going up and all the people that are here, even at 9 in the morning in Hong Kong. So welcome everybody, thank you so much. This is actually the 7th annual co-production, co-participation event that we have done between the Hong Kong Trade Development Council and PGA International. And I'm really proud that that's the case, that we've been doing this for so long, even in this brand new COVID world. PGA, just to give everyone a little bit, very quick background, the PGA, the Producers Guild of America, is an organization of north of 9,000 producers based all over the globe. Focused, it's basically a trade association focused on education, on advocacy, and on connection between producers and the rest of the world of content production all over the globe. We have a really vibrant and exciting international committee that's my favorite part of the PGA, of course, including a Asia task force, which is headed by our amazing moderator today, Maria Low-Orzel. And so I will be turning that over to her in just a minute. But I also just want to encourage anyone who is an independent producer, anyone who is anywhere on the globe, if you are interested in the PGA, there's lots of information on our website. We welcome members who live all over the planet, and we would love to have you participate and be part of the events we do virtually, or perhaps in some future place, we will all see each other in the real world. IRL may happen. And with that, I would say thank you again to HKTDC and to all of our amazing panelists, and I will turn it over to Maria to introduce everyone. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Good morning, 大家好. It's very early in Hong Kong and kind of evening in North America. So thanks for joining us for our discussion today. So first, please join me in welcoming our distinguished panel of industry experts. Belle Avery is the producer of the global hit, The Meg, which grossed over $500 million at the box office. And I guess due to popular demand, she might be making The Meg too. We can answer that question. Joining us from Auckland, New Zealand is Chris Payne, who is the head of international relations at the New Zealand Film Commission. Welcome, Chris. A leading expert in film financing for over 30 years, Adrian Ward pioneered the concept of gap financing in the 1990s. He is now the head of entertainment banking at the Bank of California. And last but not least is Rance Powell, my good friend, who is the founder and CEO of Artisan Gateway, a leading advisory firm that specializes in cinema and film business. And before starting Artisan Gateway, Rance was a vice president at AMC Cinemas. So welcome everybody. As we all know, the pandemic is really impacting every facet of our lives. And the TV and film production business is one of the most affected. And so are cinemas. So my first questions to the panelists is, what have you been doing in the last 5 months? Should I start with Rance? What have you been doing since everything is down, cinemas are closed? What have you been doing?
Well, Maria, Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure and honor to be with everybody today. The Artisan Gateway is in the international business development, research, and market intelligence part of the theatrical business. And no doubt the last few months have seen quite a bit of change in the clients that we serve. With the cinema's closure and so forth, many challenges, and now people looking forward to this post-COVID, era with many questions. Through this period of time, we have had the chance to talk with many of our clients, which include the major Hollywood studios, a number actually Asian majors, the Motion Picture Association, and so forth. And, really we are in unprecedented times in terms of all of the different pieces that are coming together now that are going to shape the next few steps. The research and the market intelligence parts of our business have probably been where we've been most busy, watching the trends and watching the markets and so forth, advising clients about things that we see on the ground, hopefully informing them about how to look forward and make decisions. So we've been busy with that.
Thank you. Chris?
Hi everybody, Dajia Hao. I'm Chris, Head of International Relations. The New Zealand Film Commission is New Zealand's national screen agency, and we're involved in the funding and development and production of feature films, as well as development of series. We've had a particularly busy period. In March, we entered a lockdown period, level 4. And then through that period as an agency, we were heavily involved in repurposing a lot of our funds towards development to ensure that the production sector was actively developing a pipeline of productions that were able to go into production when the brakes came off, and really to ensure that those productions that we'd given conditional financing to were well placed to go when production was possible. And we were very fortunate in early May to be able to release the COVID-19 health and safety protocols and standards endorsed by the government agency WorkSafe here, which essentially paved the way back to production for the sector. And so the country returned to a level 2 footing, alert level 2 footing on the 13th of May. We had the first feature film that we were involved in financing going back into production after being stalled on the 29th of May. And really since then, there's been a lot of local production here, a lot of international production, whether it's in terms of co-production activity or international service production that's happening here. So it's remained a relatively busy time. In my role, which has typically involved a lot of attendance at markets, whether it's financing markets or co-production markets, that's all shifted online. So a lot of what I've been doing has been connecting New Zealand producers to financiers around the world, connecting New Zealanders to streamers. And so, yeah, we've still maintained a very strong international outlook, both in terms of welcoming production in, as well as helping New Zealand talent and projects access the international marketplace and partners.
Okay, great. Sounds like you've been busy. Adrian?
Yeah, hi Maria, that's a very good question. We've actually been pretty busy, to be honest. The first couple of months of the lockdown, we were one of the banks that participated in the government stimulus program. There's a paycheck protection program, which provided financing to companies to keep people employed. And so that was, that was very busy for us. We did a lot of those loans, and that was available to all businesses, not just entertainment. And then sort of from May onwards, one of the things that's been really good to see is a lot of independent producers have, adapted very quickly to that environment. And so, we were seeing people rejigging production plans and making different arrangements to get films into production, whether it was, taking them out of the country or doing it under, the COVID protocols. And we were also lucky in that, A, we didn't have any films that were shut down as a result. We weren't in the middle of production on any. And B, we have a couple of clients that are primarily in the animation business, and so they were able to get a film up and running, and they had a completion bond that already, you know, didn't have the COVID exclusion, so we were able to move forward with that. So, you know, and then probably since June and you know, July, you know, things have slowly picked up, certainly internationally. We've got a television show that's about to go in Canada. We're looking at a new production down in Australia, and a film that was actually made during COVID in Australia. They've come to us to sort of do some refinancing based on some of the producer offset that they've earned. So, you know, and a lot of sort of just going around and reinforcing relationships and making sure that people are aware that when they are able to get back into production, that, you know, we're one of the few banks left out there that's, you know, willing to provide production financing.
Well, we'll talk more about that. And Belle, what have you been doing in the last 5 months?
Well, I've been very fortunate actually, because I've been working with the writers of Meg 2 and with Warner Brothers and with the other producer Lorenzo on it. And we've really had a wonderful time doing the creative aspect and working the script to get it where we wanted it to be. And also now starting kind of a soft prep of kind of understanding where to shoot. And then also developing the downtime I've tried to use very wisely in development, working with other writers on other co-productions as well. So it's been a productive time actually.
Okay, so great. So I like to follow up on that. So during this pandemic, everybody is locked down and you're supposed to stay at home. How do you work with your writers and your other team member of your project to push the project forward? You Zoom all day, or you're on the phone all the time? How could you possibly get things done?
Is that for me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, it's definitely a challenging time, if you will. Zoom is great and it's terrific, and it certainly is a useful tool, but it never will replace the energy in the room that you have, especially creatively when you're going around talking about a script or a character or humor that you want or different things. So in that way, it's a learning curve of how to work together with Zoom. But it's been challenging, but it's also, it's been pretty smooth for us. Same thing when we're, you know, setting up our budgets and all of those things. We just get everyone on Zoom, and I think some of us, we just pretend we're in the same living room together. But it's, I would say the first 3 or 4 times it was more difficult. Now we're getting used to it. So now we're more relaxed, and, you know, it's more comfortable, and we're getting more done. But it was relatively an easy process for us, to be quite honest.
Okay. Most of America is shut down. There are very few projects that have actually restarted, maybe some smaller indie films or maybe a TV show or two. So I want to ask Chris, who is plugged into what's going on around the world with all the different territories. Are you seeing many filmmakers looking to move their productions overseas from America or to other places, Chris?
Yes, we are. Look, we're seeing a lot of interest in New Zealand from a co-production perspective through one or more of the 18 co-production arrangements that we have all throughout Asia, continental Europe, Israel, Canada, South Africa, Australia, as well as inbound studio productions as well. So a lot of these productions are either looking at doing the full shoot in New Zealand, or in some cases, both full shoot and post. Some of the co-productions were set up with other treaty partners and are now looking at New Zealand and are looking at shooting New Zealand, posting UK, for example. And we're also seeing quite a lot of innovation in co-production in particular around the idea of co-directing, for example, as well as remote directing, where a New Zealander might be based here in New Zealand, but directing a shoot that's happening in Taipei or Singapore or elsewhere. And also a bit of a growth in terms of animation, which, as everyone will be aware, is one of the more buoyant areas of our sector, in that the animation sector has been used to working remotely, you know, for a long time. So stands in a really good place to kind of weather the storm to a large extent.
But other than New Zealand, which we love, are there any other territories that are actually actively producing at this time?
I'm aware of production happening in Iceland and in South Korea, for example, although I gather that there has been a little bit of a resurgence of COVID-19 in South Korea, which has curtailed some production activity there. I think New Zealand's fortunate as one of the few English language industries that has remained reasonably buoyant. And it's not without its challenges, but I think that that there is a pathway through this, and New Zealand is very happy to assist those productions that can work here. And some of the other types of productions that we're being approached with are American independent productions that are looking at the idea of a New Zealand director, for example, or bringing in a number of above-the-line roles into a production that could largely be made here.
So thank you, Chris. Before we can embark on that journey to Down Under or anywhere else to shoot, we're going to need financing. With the COVID going on, Adrian, can you address currently how do independent producers get financing to make the film?
Yeah, that's obviously been one of the key issues certainly for independent producers. And just to sort of, tag on to what Chris was saying, I mean, obviously New Zealand and a couple of other places were very early in the, in the process of getting production up and running again. But one of the key components to some other places like Canada and the UK, and obviously there's legislation currently in Congress here in the US, it revolves around the insurance coverage. So in those territories, you've got government-backed insurance, and I think there's also that is now available in Australia. So that was really the sticking point for many months, is how would financiers, look at taking the risk of, another outbreak or a second wave, and that, shutting down productions that got going. And so we were sort of waiting to see what would happen. There were some private insurers that sort of came out offering COVID coverage, but it was very expensive. It was somewhere between, initially it was a 20% premium. I think there's a product out there now that's 7 to 10%, which is still very expensive. But I think as the government backstops are a much more viable solution. So, I think for the few months where there was really nothing happening, it was just a case for producers to, take stock and, maybe develop the script, work on other aspects of the production and wait to a point where the financiers were able to actually, cover that, that insurance gap that's happening with the, production insurance and the completion bonders.
Okay. Belle, I know you come from a financial background. Can you give us some more insight into how do indie producers obtain financing during this very difficult time?
Well, I will say it has been incredibly difficult, because I have several other co-productions with China that I did lose investors, some of the investment in some of them, simply because a lot of the people investing in films too have other businesses. For example, those investors were oil. They were in oil. And the oil has taken a beating, as everyone knows. So I think that a lot of, the independent financing, when you get these investors, they come from other different businesses. So I think a lot of businesses globally have been hurt. So it's been a bit of a challenge. But on the plus side, is that I think that with a lot of with streaming doing what it's doing, is that it's creating a huge demand for content. So therefore, I think that the investors will snap back up as soon as they can. But I think that we need to get a rapid testing set up, and we need to be able to have a safe place to shoot, and we need to be able to make all of these things take place with these protocols in place, so that the investors do feel safe again. That's going to be a crucial thing.
Yeah, well, following up on the idea of streaming, I want to ask Rance a question. The streaming seems to be so very, very popular now. So do you think people will ever go back to cinemas again, Rance? I know you're in the cinema business. I mean, I just recently read a US financial analyst. He even said that cinemas are like blockbuster video stores. It should be abandoned and converted to data centers. What do you think about that, Rance?
Well, there's certainly been a lot of fretting about that. And, cinemas have been closed in so many places for so long. It's understandable the reason why. I think, the benefit that we have now over these last few weeks is the observation of cinemas reopening in different places around the world, and people returning with interest. We've had the chance to talk over this last month or so. China, of course, the success of 800, and then also recently, just over this week, Love You Forever, which had a $50 million opening. I want to say 800 is, let me see here, over, is it 210 million in box office now. And, so the results speak for themselves. I think, in the, kind of at the depths, of everybody's worry was a concern about whether or not people would be comfortable in the cinema environment, whether or not it was a safe environment. And I think we can see now pretty much across the board in markets that are reopening or have reopened, that with the proper protocols, that the exhibition industry has handled this quite well. Exit surveys that we've seen in other parts of Southeast Asia. I know New Zealand is a highlight in this area. Maybe Chris will talk about that. The Middle East and Europe and so forth, pretty consistently, people that are interested in cinemas, that are seeing films now, have been very satisfied with the experience. And then it becomes just a matter of films. Must-see films such as 800 in China are a very good example of what's required, to make that resurgence of the industry sustainable. But
Okay.
What we see so far is quite encouraging.
Yes, Chris, you want to add to that?
Oh yeah, no, look, I mean, I've been going to the cinema a little bit recently. I saw Never Really, Sometimes Always last week, and I'm seeing the 800 tomorrow. And my impression of the cinema is that, people are going, they're really enjoying being back. We funded 2 feature films, and both of those features are in cinema in New Zealand at the moment. One of them is called This Town, and the other one is called Low Down Dirty Criminals. And they are number 1 and number 2 at the New Zealand box office, which is really terrific. And we also did a bit of an exit survey process for the opening weekend of This Town, just to really see what people's attitudes were coming out of lockdown. And it was interesting to see that 36% of people signed up for a VOD service during lockdown. 50% of people said they're maintaining their movie-going frequency compared to pre-lockdown. And then 79% of people said they expected to keep going to the cinema as frequently in the future. And actually even 16% said they'd probably go to the movies more often than they did previously. So it's a buoyant time here, and I think people are seeing the value of the streaming world coexisting with the theatrical world. And personally, I have great hopes that both will continue to exist long into the future.
So Belle, when you make the Meg 2, do you think that it's going to go theatrical, or it's going to direct to streaming?
Absolutely, it's going to go theatrical. Yes, definitely it will. I think that there's always going to be a place for theatrical. I agree with what Chris said and with what Rand said. I think that people have been so cooped up too during this period of time. They just can't wait to get out. And nothing can replace the cinema experience that you share with the people that you go with, and the energy of the audience. And I think that streaming's created a whole different revenue source, but I don't think it will take away from theaters. I think that theaters will still exist, and you will see Meg in 2022 on the screen. Meg 2.
Great. We look forward to it. So Adrian, when you, I think you're unmuted, Adrian. When you loan for the independent, when you create a loan for the independent producers, do you believe that the theatrical distribution aspect is really very important in your decision to let them have the loan or not?
Good question. Generally, a good chunk of our business these days is TV, and so out of the remaining, business that's film, there's actually very few of those that are primarily theatrical films. Certainly in the U.S. We're a relatively small bank, so we're not, financing, $100 million movies. But I think, and again, just to follow on what other people are saying, I think, for that part of the market where you are making theatrical films, I actually think that, and certainly my experience during lockdown is that people are very sort of tired of sitting in their living room and trying to find a movie to watch on the streaming platforms. And, the studios obviously have not, they've broken that window here and there with a couple of releases, but the really big franchises are always going to be theatrical films. And I think, for me, that's an experience that you can't replicate. And so I do think that that's going to continue to be a very important part of the overall model for films that are made in, for theatrical release. I just think that the overall pie in terms of distribution revenues, is being sliced up, differently these days. And I think that was a process that started before COVID. And even though COVID, will, certainly in the US be a tough time for a lot of theatrical distributors, I think that those habits are going to go back to what they were before. And it's tough to watch those big franchise movies on a small screen or, outside of the theater.
So true. So with Hollywood virtually shut down in the last few months, a lot of local territories are making their own content. So my question I'm going to throw it to Rance is that in the future, is Hollywood still going to be the key in the theatrical business, or the local content is going to take over?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. I want to echo and add on a little bit to what the other panelists had mentioned about opportunity. And yes, the big tentpole films, the big budget films and so forth, will continue to, what we can observe is that they're going to continue to, the cinema part of the business is going to continue to be very important. One thing I wanted to throw out to everybody, because I think the rest of the panelists are more qualified than I, to speak to this. But, as cinemas move towards big tentpole stuff, I believe it creates opportunities because, most of us are not making big blockbuster films. And so, that may create opportunities because as we look forward as market observers, what we can see is a future for an exhibition industry that may be seeking out content, different kinds of content and more types of films. And, there's many, many moving pieces between now and that point in time. But, we see opportunity in those areas and an exhibition community that is going to be suitors for those kinds of discussions. So I want to mention that.
Yeah, but are you seeing a content drought at the moment? With cinemas opening up in China, Hollywood not releasing so many movies. You had a reissue of Harry Potter a couple of weeks ago in China. Do we see that going on in the future?
Well, the reissue of Harry Potter, and this was before 800 was released. Relative terms, that reissue did quite well in China. And so, I think the fretting over whether or not people will be interested in seeing new films, important films, regardless of their origin is, I think 800 answers that question quite well. And so for the big studios, whether they're Hollywood or otherwise, good stories are good stories, right? And people are always going to be interested in seeing that. And I'll add, regardless of the platform, regardless of the distribution platform. So in our discussions with clients, and many of the major studios are going through restructurings right now. You can see priority and emphasis in their actions and awareness of streaming and so forth, like, like we talked about a little bit. But, never a doubt that, films made for cinema remains a priority for the big players. And to answer your question more directly, local filmmaking, we believe is going to be a growing priority, local stories and so forth, co-productions and things like this, as well as places like we see in Southeast Asia, where the local film industry is really coming into its own. Places like Indonesia and Vietnam, and some of the other places in Southeast Asia, where over the last 2, 3, 4 years, you're starting to see local films do admissions in box office comparable to some big Hollywood films on much lower budgets, mind you. And so, the local markets are discovering their own talent and stories and lore. They're professionalizing and so forth. And I see this as really, again, in positive terms, an opportunity for places like that.
Great. So if I'm an independent filmmaker, which I think a lot of our audiences are, I just made a film, small budget. Should I hold it for something bigger later, or should I just go release it now? What should we do?
Oh gosh, I defer to the rest of the people on the panel on that one.
But if you speak from the theatrical business point of view, so if you are a theater owner, you're only getting 800 and maybe getting Harry Potter reissue, would you consider a smaller film that normally would not have a theatrical release in your cinema?
Yeah, well, I'll give a brief answer, and then I'm going to see if anybody else has some thoughts. But I think that going forward, there's a lot of uncertainty for cinema owners. I think I agree with some of the other comments that going forward, you're going to see more emphasis on bigger budget, tentpole, must-see films, which means that exhibitors are going to be looking for content. So I think there will be interest and opportunity there. There's probably going to be some adjustments along the way to make that product available to them, in a convenient way. But yes, I see that in the future. I don't know if anybody else has any comments on that from a producer's perspective.
Anyone else have a comment about that? Maybe Belle?
Well, what I would say is that it depends on what your film is and the genre of your film, and if it feels like it could be a theatrical release, that would be the first thing I would say. But I think that streaming also is an option for someone who's created an independent film as well, a smaller film. I think one of the greatest things about Netflix and the streaming life that we have now on television is that we get to see different cultures, and we get to see their TV shows, whether it's an Israeli show, a Turkish show, a Russian show. And it's really cool because what it's done is it's kind of leveled the playing field in the sense of us really getting to see the difference in the cultures and the little differences and some of the big differences. But in the end, no matter what the shows are, all of us have more in common than not, which is always interesting. So it's fascinating to see that. So for an independent film, somebody who's made a little independent film, try theatrical. If not, though, you have streaming.
Great, thank you. So I want to go back to Adrian on the financing and insurance. Have you heard that in other countries that the film commissions of certain countries are underwriting the insurance for productions?
Yeah, I think now there's there's government-backed insurance products in Canada and the UK and now Australia and probably some other places. There's a bill in Congress here. I don't know whether that's going to move forward before the the election, but there are also some individual states here in the U.S. that are considering providing some sort of insurance policy to sort of reignite production when that's possible. So that really, as I said earlier, that really was the you know, the significant moment for those territories that have got that they could really open the doors, you know, in the right way in terms of attracting, you know, productions that either were already underway or were going to be underway in that location, and indeed pulling in, you know, projects from other territories that you know were going to go elsewhere, but you know didn't have that ability. So, you know, they're just that ahead of the curve, and I think that's, you know, that's been a good thing, certainly in, you know, territories where you've got, you know, the crew and all the other facilities you need to get you know, all different types of movies underway.
Great. And Chris, any comments regarding what New Zealand is doing in terms of providing insurance?
Sure. So we've worked very closely with our producing community to present an insurance underwrite solution to government here, and we're waiting on a decision about that soon, which, you know, hopefully should come through reasonably soon. The government here has been very supportive of the sector overall through this time, and one of the measures that was implemented was the provision of a fund of about 13.4 million New Zealand, which is around 9 million US. And that was to support productions that were halted when we went into lockdown. And we identified 47 New Zealand productions that were at different stages, whether they had Office of Finance, whether they were in production or in post. And so that support is enabling many of those productions that were stalled to restart. But as I say, we're hopeful of an insurance solution going forward. And yeah, fingers crossed.
But you told us that some production has already started in New Zealand. So without the insurance, how do these people move forward with their production?
It depends on the scale. So if we're talking about very large production that's here from the US, for example, then oftentimes the studio productions are self-insuring or taking that risk themselves. Local New Zealand film and television is operating at a certain level, and certainly some of the New Zealand television shows, whether it's a nightly drama series or whether it's other types of production, are operating. But certainly for larger projects of scale that require various pieces of international finance or high-level cast or other aspects, those productions beyond the 47 that were stalled are the ones that we're looking to support going forward through an insurance solution. So,
okay, your territory is open. What are the hoops I have to jump before I can come to the movie? Like, is there any COVID test? Do I have to go to quarantine? What are all the long list of protocol we have to follow? Maybe you can share that with us?
Sure. So it's reasonably straightforward. Essentially, the New Zealand border is closed, with the exception of New Zealanders who are returning to New Zealand, as well as critical workers who are given a border exemption to come into the country. And we've seen a number of those in the screen sector, whether it's people coming in for the Avatar sequels, or Lord of the Rings, or Jane Campion's Netflix feature film. So essentially what happens is that there's an application process that a production goes through, which can take anywhere from sort of 3 to 5 weeks. And then if approved, the people travel to New Zealand, and then they need to spend 14 days in a mandated quarantine facility, which is typically a hotel. And that's overseen by the military. And there are a series of tests that happen while people are in that hotel. And then assuming that the tests are clear, then they can leave the facility at the end of the 14-day quarantine and go to set or go to location, and that's it essentially. And then alongside that, there is once people are in the country and production is underway, as I mentioned previously, there's a very robust set of health and safety protocols and standards that need to be adhered to, and every production has a health and safety plan that is a very comprehensive document which ensures that the production is doing everything possible and appropriately.
So Belle, when you are prepping for your next movie, with all the requirements from New Zealand, do you also have to follow all the protocols set forth by the guilds of the United States, the DGA, IATSE, SAG, so on and so forth?
Absolutely.
And what kind of hit are you getting on your, hitting your budget?
Well, it definitely does affect the budget. There's no question about that. But we will follow the protocols that are set forth by the unions. And I will say too, PGA has done an incredible job. I just want to say that because, making sure that the protocols are out there and working with all of the unions as well, making that available to everybody is really, really great. So we really do appreciate that as well. But yeah, it does increase the budget. There's no question about that. I don't know how much yet. We're not at that stage yet. And I think things will change over the next month or two. I think there'll be some rapid tests that will work much faster, that will be less expensive. But we do, of course, have to take into account the quarantining. But then again, when you have when I go over there, for example, and I'm working with the producers and some of the actors that are going over there, it's not going to be such a hardship, the 14-day quarantine, because as Chris said, we're kind of put in one place, so we can still work in small groups. And as long as we're all testing negative, then we can be released out onto the set. So that's
in New Zealand, you're allowed to interact with each other, because I have heard some territories that, to me, that if you're under quarantine, you have to go to a government hotel and you're in the room. You're not allowed to come out because they would put a bracelet on your wrist, which is Bluetooth to their phone. And, it's kind of like a prisoner, and you cannot leave your room. So in that situation, how is that going to impact your prep?
Well, Chris can probably answer this better than me in that sense, but is that when I talked to New Zealand about this before, when we're coming in, we can work in small groups together. Unless they've changed that, we can do that. But if that does change, you're just going to have, you're simply going to be back at Zoom, or be able to socially distance and still keep 10 feet. I would think that the hotel, and again, Chris can go more on this, but that we would be able to be in a place where we will have some places outside also too, where we could sit and talk. Chris, what do you think?
I'd love to be able to provide a definitive answer, but I need to check with a colleague here who's sort of more of a frontline person in terms of the policy relating to border exemptions. But I would say that it has proved to be a very smooth process, and people have used the time very productively, as Belle mentioned, to enable meetings and whether that's through Zoom or otherwise to move things forward. And when the Avatar team returned, they were able to use that time here in Wellington incredibly productively to ensure that as soon as they were out of the quarantine, they sort of hit the ground running.
Great. So with all that quarantine protocol, Belle, do you think that we're going to see a change in storytelling in the future?
Well, I think there's going to be some interesting creative storytelling that comes out of this, that's for sure. But I think once there's a vaccination and that we'll resume back to normal. I do think that there will be a vaccine. And I think that it'll go back to normal. I think right now you won't have big crowd scenes, and the intimacy will not be what it was before in films. But I don't think overall it will affect it, personally.
So there's no, for you, you're not going to change your script to accommodate the COVID protocols. For instance, if you have some background actors and they need to be quarantined for 14 days, so do we really have that background actor, or do we have 10 background actors or 100 background actors? If everybody needs to have 14-day quarantine, how would that affect your thinking as a producer?
Well, that's a really good question. Well, fortunately, for when we would need more people, there's VFX that we can do that actually could make it appear like more people, if you will. I think that's a really good question. I think that if we're shooting in Australia or New Zealand, for example, a lot of the background actors we would be using from there. So they would be tested on the set when they come, and they would already be in Australia. But if we're bringing somebody in, 14-day quarantine. So we would take more precautions if we were bringing all of those extras in, yes.
It's very tough, isn't it? So
yes.
Are there any positive or negative impact to you personally from this remote working? I mean, you touched on it earlier that it was difficult at first, but there anything that's positive coming out of it from this remote learning? Yeah, other than the fact that, you know, you can wear pajamas to do pre-production, but are there any positive things that came out of all this?
I think, personally, I think so, absolutely. I mean, I've gotten to spend more time at home. This is the longest I've ever been at home, to be quite honest. So that's been a plus. I think in a lot of the Zoom meetings and a lot of the creatives that I work with and just different people at Warner Brothers and even with Gravity Pictures, I think fathers are spending more time with their children that they would have never had the opportunity to do, mothers as well. So I think that there's a lot of positivity that comes out of this as well. And it's fun when you're in the middle of talking or somebody's telling you something and a little kid's head goes by or the dog jumps up and knocks the computer over. It's just, there's a human element to it that's quite wonderful. So I think that's all good. And yeah. I think we have to look at everything always positive. I think that it's not good to look at it from a negative perspective.
Absolutely. Adrian, anything positive or negative came out of this remote working for 5 months?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I mean, one of the big factors for me is I no longer have to, you know, spend 2 hours in my car commuting through LA traffic. So, you know, I've got a couple of extra hours of work or whatever I might do at that time. I have found, you know, within the bank that, you know, I've spent more time, you know, being in touch with people that otherwise I probably wouldn't have seen. You know, we have various offices around, you know, Los Angeles and Orange County. So, you know, I feel a little more connected. And I also feel like the same thing with a lot of our clients, you know, and people that have, you know, are looking to get financing. I think, you know, in the absence of, you know, having a lunch or whatever, I've been able to spend more time and, you know, it's been easier to have access to people and get to know what they're working on. So in some respects, it's actually been really interesting, and you get, you know, a better feel for what people are doing. There's more, you know, I think there's more questions. We're all asking the same questions, and so I think there's been a lot more collaboration about, you know, when someone finds a solution to something that's COVID related, they're very willing to share that, you know, within the community. So it's you know, there's definitely been some positive, you know, sort of aspects of it.
And Rance, anything positive come out of this? Did we lose Rance? Hi, Rance. I think you're unmuted.
How about now?
Hi, Rance. Hi, sorry. My question was, anything positive or negative came out of this remote working for over 5 months?
Well, I'll make a general comment, you know, kind of from our little corner, you know, of this discussion, which is, you know, we see the experience of going through COVID as accelerating industry change, and from a filmmaker, from a storyteller's perspective, what we see is in a business environment on the other side of this that is going to create, you know, more and different ways of sharing stories and films and shows and so forth with the audience. And so from, you know, producer's perspective, I think probably, you know, positive things will come out of this. And I say that inclusive of, you know, the cinema experience as well. I mean, we you know, some of the other comments that, you know, we see theatrical as a vibrant and important part of this business for a long, long time to come. But I don't think anybody, but many of the groups that we talk to are not looking forward to an exact return of pre-COVID, post-COVID. And so I think there will be some good things that happen out of that, particularly from the filmmaker's perspective.
Thank you. And Chris?
Look, I agree with everything that's been said previously by my fellow panelists. I think the interesting thing for New Zealand in particular is that, you know, we're so far from the rest of the world that we've often had to deal with something that we call the tyranny of distance. But I guess what this horrible process has meant for New Zealand is that that distance aspect has become less of an issue, because when we're working digitally, we're much more connected with the international marketplace. We're not having to do 30-hour plane rides to go to the Cannes film market, for example. So it's actually ironically fostered a higher degree of connectedness internationally for New Zealand, but also I would say within New Zealand that, you know, we are much more engaged and accessible to people in regional New Zealand, to other centres that perhaps, you know, we aren't going to as much as staff. So I think that has been amazing. And I do think the comment that was made previously about it generating a degree of real human interaction and a kind of, you know, seeing a very high-powered executive, you know, in their lounge with a child running through chasing a dog behind them or something. It's been really great in kind of reflecting that shared humanity and breaking down barriers. I also think from an innovation perspective, and this goes to Rance's point really as well, that it is forcing a degree of innovation in the value chain. And, you know, one example from a New Zealand context is a company called Shift 72, which is based in a small city outside of Auckland. And over many years, this secure video streaming company has been providing the architecture for the Cannes film market, for AFM, for South by Southwest. And it's now, you know, during this lockdown period and the pandemic period, has grown by 400%. And it's now really one of the major festival platforms internationally, as festivals choose to go either hybrid or fully online. And so that's been an amazing success story for New Zealand. And they've also developed an offering called Screen Plus, which essentially enables cinema chains to have a VOD, transactional VOD or premium VOD capability within their website. So essentially means that that loyal patron base, even though they can't necessarily attend the cinema, is still able to keep that relationship with the cinema chain, access great content, and to keep you know, the sector buoyant.
Thank you so much. I want to make sure there's enough time for Q&A from the audience. So if the audience would kindly type in their questions in the Q&A section of the screen, and we will try to answer them as best that we can. The first question here is, are you seeing interest in films that may have been overlooked under normal circumstances? They're now getting attention because of production or because of production hiatus. Does the streaming boom help certain types of projects? Any takers for this question?
Well,
Adrian.
Sorry.
Adrian?
Well, I was going to say, I mean, you know, I don't know whether it's necessarily due to the, you know, the COVID or the production hiatus, but I do, you know, I think with the, you know, the streamers, you know, and the proliferation of the competition in that world, I think there's definitely more opportunity for, you know, different films to be made and different voices to be heard. I mean, and we've seen that as well. And, you know, certainly, you know, two of the big sort of movements in recent years here in terms of a lot more female-driven films, and you know, and certainly as well, probably more to come with regards to the you know, the Black Lives Matter movement. So, you know, because those services are not necessarily driven by, you know, box office numbers and things like that. There's an algorithm. There's all different types of demographics that they're looking to, you know, find in terms of subscribers. I think you know, there's a huge opportunity. Certainly in the, you know, many years I've been doing this, that you know, just hasn't been there before.
Great. I have a question here. Polly Rance can probably answer that best. A drive-in theater here to stay, because there's been a proliferation of drive-ins in the United States and around the world. Do you think it's just a COVID situation, or do you think that's gonna stay?
No, I think drive-in theaters are here to stay. Here in Los Angeles, in the US, there are many examples of people of drive-in theaters doing very well. You know, I think the important thing for drive-in is, and because it's a unique experience, it's not the same as going to a cinema, it's not the same as staying home. I think the question for drive-in theaters is, you know, a question of business scale. And so with all of the drive-in theaters that are open, and this is not just the US market, but in the international markets that we see, and this includes pop-up theaters, parking lots and shopping malls, and out in open fields, and, you know, on the sides of barn doors, and, you know, all of that. What we've observed is that, you know, they're quite popular, but drive-in theaters as a percentage of total cinemas or percentage of total screens out there is still, you know, quite tiny. And so I think it means opportunity for the right people.
Okay. Anybody else want to comment on that? Val, what do you think of drive-in theaters? You think there's a here to stay?
I think that it's a niche market, and I think it is here to stay. And I think it is a different experience. So I would agree with Rance totally on that.
Yeah. We have a question here. Oh, with the pandemic, do you see a lot of feature film projects being turned into TV series because of streaming? Maybe Belle can jump in on that one. Like, instead of making a feature film, because, you know, it's easier to sell TV series to streaming?
Actually, I'm developing 2 films that were feature films that were pretty big films, and now we are doing them as series, streaming series, both of them. So yes, I would say that will take place sometimes. That's what we're doing.
And what is what drove you to do it this way? If you started out with a feature film, what made you say, oh, I'm going to make it in TV series?
Well, both of these scripts had extraordinary sequel opportunities, so that we knew that we could take more time creating it as a series, but also because there's such a demand for it. One, for example, is sci-fi. So globally, there's a good demand for sci-fi, and it's a co-production with China. So there's more opportunity streaming-wise, we felt, and it would move faster, and we've actually found out that it is. So both of them. But I think you have to have a story that's franchisable, or a story that's ongoing if you're going to make a film into a TV series. You have to have the content that can support it.
Yeah, maybe I would divert this question also to Adrian. Adrian mentioned that he handles a lot of financing for TV series. Is that what drives a lot of feature film into TV series, because you would be able to finance them?
I don't know. I don't think it's really a financing sort of dynamic. I think, you know, what I've observed is that, you know, if you look at sort of the evolution of Netflix as an example, I mean, they initially acquired a lot of independent movies, and then they seem to transition into longer format TV shows. You know, obviously a TV show takes up more time, and if it performs well enough, it's going to do multiple seasons. And so it's, you know, from that point of view, I think it's better suited to that sort of platform. And from a creative point as well, for a lot of things, you know, you get time to tell the story and develop the characters in different ways than you can in 90 minutes. So, but I think again that proliferation of competition is driving both film and TV. So if you're writing or producing for either format, you've got much more, you know, many more places to find a home for it.
Good point. I just want to also ask Chris the same question. In terms of co-productions, are there more opportunities in feature films or TV series that are, you know, aiming for streaming?
It's a good question. I think there's opportunities in both, and certainly we're seeing an increase in series co-production interest. We're seeing a lot of feature film co-production interest. A number of the streamers are very actively looking at how they can develop series co-productions that would then trigger the incentives that we have here in New Zealand. So I see co-production policy being even more important over the years ahead, and particularly for New Zealand, where we have a reasonably small population base, and we're keen to get stories out to the world and to create projects of scale. So we've recently created funds that enable the development of projects that are intended as series drama, premium drama projects for the international marketplace. And it certainly seems that from the various meetings that I've hosted for New Zealand producers with the streamers that there is a very high level of interest in New Zealand content, and really to the point that Belle made previously, people are looking for really specific stories, and it doesn't matter that, you know, it's in a foreign country and perhaps the culture is incredibly different. People are looking for that sense of authenticity, and they're ready to watch subtitles. They're happy to watch subtitles. So I think it's a very interesting time for cross-cultural collaboration, for cross-border collaboration, and for a whole a wealth of different stories that audiences haven't seen really to come to market.
We have another question about theatrical and OTT kind of merging. Do we see budgets going down? I mean, let's not talk about the big studios. The tentpoles will always be the tentpoles. When we talk about mid to lower budget production, do we see that budget sliding down? Belle, do you think?
I don't think so. I mean, Adrian might be better to address this, but I don't think so. I don't think you'd see it sliding down. I think if you have a great story, whether it's a drama or whether it's a comedy or whatever it might be, I think that there always is a place for those. I don't think that there's a reason why the budgets would go down. I think they will be such, you know, as valuable. And I know Netflix, and Adrian would know, and Rance would know better than me what they're paying for these types of films, but it varies anywhere from, you know, $2 million a movie to, you know, $100 million a movie. So I think that it's not going to affect that.
Okay. They have a question. This is the most controversial question at the moment. Is about the theatrical window. So the question is, we have fewer products and we have to sit farther apart in the cinema. So, and then now the window is shrinking. Is there a disconnect there somewhere? Should I throw that to Rance first?
Oh gosh, why me?
But it's true, right? You got, you know, in Hong Kong, I think it's at 30% occupancy rate, or 50%, and people have to sit very far apart, so you can't sell to capacity. At the same time, you know, we're collapsing the window. How are we going to make any money? Is that weird? How do we move forward?
You know, I guess I'll go back to the example of 800 that we were talking about just, you know, a little while ago. You know, 800 is over 200 million in box office. And the thing that we didn't mention last time was that, you know, this is occurring in China, where, you know, perhaps 9,500, you know, out of 10,700, you know, cinemas are open. So limited capacity. And at that, you know, 50% occupancy is maximum sales. And so, you know, how that translates to, you know, what happens, you know, next with the industry is, I think there's too many moving pieces to say right now. But as I mentioned before, you know, the clients and partners that we talk to are looking forward with eyes wide open, and you know, seeing that the industry, you know, is going to adapt and adjust to this. At the end of the day, it's about, you know, meeting customers, you know, where they want to be met, and that very much includes in the cinema, as we're seeing by the examples so far.
So true. We are kind of running out of time to answer all the questions, so I apologize to those people who inputted such thoughtful questions. I'm sure the HKTDC is going to collect this data, and if there's a way we can answer them directly back to you, we will do so. But before I let the panelists go, I have just one question, and I'm going to go around the Zoom. If you have a crystal ball, what are you going to be seeing in the future, and what are you going to be most hopeful for? So I'm going to start with Adrian. Show us your crystal ball.
Wow. I think I think, I think there's going to be, from in the independent business, I think a lot of lessons are going to be learned from going through this process. I've been really excited to see a lot more collaboration. I've also been excited to see, people being a lot more global in terms of their, their ability and their willingness to sort of go elsewhere and make movies and tell different types of stories. But I think the takeaway from a lot of it is, you really got to be a lot more smart. You got to be smarter. You got to be more efficient in the way you make movies. And there's more pressure, on budgets, and there's more pressure, on the quality and all that sort of thing. But I do think ultimately that there's more opportunity out there for, the independent world to, to fill the ever increasing void in the industry that's, sort of left behind by the studios who are concentrating on the big tentpole movies. So I'm actually quite bullish that, once COVID is dealt with, the independent business is gonna, is gonna really flourish, as long as you're doing it in a smart way.
Okay, Chris, what do you see in your crystal ball?
My crystal ball looks a lot like Adrian's, actually. I think he's...
Even though you're miles away across the ocean.
I think we both bought the same crystal ball on eBay. Look, I completely agree. I think, a big area of focus for me is innovation and efficiency in the value chain. And I do see a huge amount of development in that space. And I think that there will be increased market access for voices and stories that perhaps were not so visible. And I think ultimately that there will be a lot more diversity and a lot more choice for consumers, which is a great thing.
Great, that's great. And Rance, can you share your crystal ball with us?
I have the same crystal ball.
That crystal ball is probably the best business model because all of you bought it.
Well, I think a lot of the comments that I've made, today have been forward-looking. That's the part of the business that we're in with our clients and so forth. I agree there will be more opportunity, and particularly from the creative, angle of perspective from the business, more ways to share more stories, with people. And so for independent producers and so forth, I see, quite a positive outlook. And then, for the industry in general, I think there's just lots of moving pieces between now and when we get out, to that some point in time. Lots of decisions will have to be made. But there will be opportunity in that as well.
Thank you, great. And Belle?
Well, I have to say, I have the same crystal ball as they have. So I believe that it's exactly pretty much what they were saying as well. I do think we have to get, as Adrian was saying, we have to get a lot smarter with our budgets. We have to adapt. And then also with what the others are saying as well, is I think that the content is going to be with the demand for content, we're going to see opportunities that the independent filmmakers may have definitely have not had before. So I think it's going to be a very creative time. And I think we'll all learn a lot from it. And I think that it'll only get better and better after we deal with COVID.
Yeah, but thank you for all the positive thoughts. But one final question that somebody just posted, which is really the reality of it. I'd like to paraphrase one of my colleagues who would say, when the hell and how the hell are we going to get on the set again? And how long is this pandemic protocol and COVID going to be biting us in the future? So just for the forecasting point of view, how long do you think this is going to last? If you have a project kind of brewing, when do you think you can even start? Belle?
I think it depends on where you are, what country you're in, and what the situation with COVID is. That I think is the most important question to ask. And then being able to set up, you have to safely, as producers or filmmakers, set up protocols that actually work, that keep people safe. So when will that be? Well, we're already seeing that they're shooting in New Zealand. We're already seeing that they're shooting in Canada. We're seeing they're shooting in other countries, and they're doing it safely so far. So I think that it's just a matter of where you are and being able to follow the proper protocols that are in place. And we're all just going to have to be incredibly diligent with that. So I don't think it's already happening. So you already see film production already going. So I think that it's just going to increase, but we just have to follow the safety protocols.
And Chris, from the New Zealand point of view, do you see that being more open up very soon? Like the 14-day quarantine may be canceled in not too distant future, or are we going to be continuing this 14-day quarantine for a long, long time to come?
It's a very good question. I mean, I can't really give a definitive answer on that. I think that really, we're all looking forward to the development and deployment of a vaccine. Obviously, that's the kind of million-dollar question. But I agree with Belle that I think, every project will be different, and what this might mean is that producers are choosing to reprioritize their slate and saying, well, actually that project is one we're going to hold back until the landscape is much clearer or it's more viable in a certain territory. And then looking at, creative approaches to containment and thinking about new ways of producing and of reaching audiences.
Great. I want to thank my panelists today, Belle Avery, Chris Payne, Adrian Ward, and Rance Powell. And I want to thank all of you for attending this seminar. And if you, like I said, I'm hoping the HKTDC will be able to collect the Q&A. And if there's a way we can reply to you, we'll do so. But thank you so much. And we look forward to seeing everybody on set.
Thank you. Thank you, Maria.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.